Welcome to Chasing the Lost. This podcast contains adult themes and violence and is not intended for all audiences. Listener discretion is advised.
We left off in part 2.
Welcome to Chasing the Lost. This podcast contains adult themes and violence and is not intended for all audiences. Listener discretion is advised.
We left off in part 2, and the girls were all sitting in jail awaiting their trials. Lori and Melinda had just accepted a plea agreement in exchange for the death penalty to be removed. When asked about the death penalty, Shanda's mother said, "The death penalty is too easy. I want them to go up for a very long time. I want this to haunt them every night. I think it's gone on long enough. It needs to be over with. My daughter needs rest, and so do we." Shanda's dad said, "I just hope some good comes of this. Kids need to listen to their parents, and parents need to listen to their kids. I hope this never happens to another child. No child deserves this. Not like this." Indiana state law states that prisoners can reduce their sentences by 1 day for each good day of time served. This meant it was possible for both Lori and Melinda to be out in less than 15 years if they received the minimum sentence. Hope Rippey's attorney rejected an agreement which would have had Hope plead guilty to murder, arson, and criminal confinement. He intended on getting her a better deal. Melinda was in the news again, but this time for having sex with an employee at the jail. The guard denied this, but word was Melinda was bragging about it. The two were caught in a security pod. The employee was immediately terminated. Melinda's older sister said Melinda told her, "He took me in a room and I was scared. He told me not to cry and turned me around and pulled my pants down. We had sex and it did not feel good. It was horrible." Melinda was then transferred to the Indiana Women's Prison until her sentencing. On November 23rd, Melinda had her plea agreement hearing, and she did admit that she poured gasoline on Shanda's already burning body. She said she knew she was still alive prior to pouring more gasoline on her. Her hearing was set for December 14th, 1992. Tony was again threatening suicide. She was sent to a behavioral unit at LifeSpring in Jeffersonville on November 9th. She told the doctor she was not suicidal. 3 days into her stay, Dr. Al-Assadi called Judge Todd and said Tony was well enough to make the trip back for a deposition. As soon as Tony was told of this, she began to threaten suicide again. So the attorneys came to LifeSpring to do the deposition. Tony remained there for quite some time. Her behavior was very up and down based on whether or not she was hearing she would have to return to the jail. She was very resistant to accept any responsibility for involvement in that night. On November 24th, Tony was told she would be discharged the following day to go back to jail. Her behavior immediately changed again. Hours before leaving, Tony was confronted by her family during therapy. When pushed on how she felt about Shanda, she began to scream. She couldn't breathe, she was hyperventilating, she was tearing out her hair, saying she wished that she could switch places with her. Lori was also in court, November 24th. She looked uninterested and bored. Her charges were read, and she pled guilty to arson, murder, and criminal confinement. Her sentencing hearing was set for the same day as Melinda's. After the court, Detectives Henry and Shipley spoke with Lori and her attorneys, and she made a full statement. She and Melinda at this point are both turning on each other. So, of course, her statement was mainly about Melinda and what Melinda had done. She said, Melinda told me she really wanted to kill her, and I didn't. I thought she was just super upset, and I thought she was just talking, like most people do. She described the ride to New Albany. She said that Hope was the person who brought up the subject of killing someone. So she and Hope gave Tony the details about the girl, which is Shanda. She went over the information about Witch's Castle, the trip to Louisville, the concert, and other things Tony had already told them. She described the scene at the woods by her house, saying it was Melinda who grabbed Shanda by the hair, hitting her in the face with her knee and forcing her to strip. She then said, before all this, Shanda hugged me and asked me not to let Melinda hurt her. She asked me not to let Melinda kill her. I can't remember what I said. I don't even remember what I thought about saying. Now, this is a side note. I find it very odd that Tony, in part 2, we heard Tony say that Shanda had hugged her and begged her not to let them hurt her. Now Lori is saying that Shanda hugged her and begged not to let Melinda hurt her. And personally, I don't believe Lori at all. Let's get back to what she said. She described the scene back at her house where they had come in and Shanda was still in the trunk. And here's how she described what happened. I went out to look in the car and I looked in on her. She was screaming and she was banging on the trunk. So I opened up the trunk and I looked at her and I said, Shanda. She looked up and her eyes rolled into the back of her head and it just scared me to death. She was bloody all over. There was blood everywhere. So I grabbed the red blanket on the back seat of the car and I put it over her because she was shivering and stuff. And I went back in and they asked me what was going on. And I said, well, she can't talk. And if she can, she won't talk to me. I think she's dying. She claimed Melinda was the one who decided to burn Shanda because her friend Crystal had said it was the best way to get rid of the body. She described how when they got to Lemon Road, Melinda got the gas out and poured it on her. So she's alleging that it was not her and Hope who did this first, but only Melinda. She said, Shanda was crying and I was bending over to try to see. I was going to lift the blanket and I guess I was going to try to talk to her, but the fire went up into my face and singed my bangs. When she was asked why she went along with all of this, she said, you don't understand. We went out thinking Melinda was just going to scare her. Melinda might beat her up. And after Shanda, she was unconscious and all the blood and everything, we just thought she was dying. So we were scared to take her anywhere. She also denied sexually assaulting Shanda. She said, we didn't molest her. We didn't do anything like that to her at all. She must have had sex with someone that night before we picked her up. Side note, there was a tire iron found in the trunk. The other girls alleged that Lori had beaten Shanda with said tire iron. And now, after the autopsy report, we know that it was a cylindrical, sharp tool that was used, but She's trying to say that Shanda must have went out and had anal sex before they did this to her. This is unbelievable. Let's get back to what she said. She denied ever having any conversations in front of Amanda or Crystal. She said Melinda told them that she did it, and her story changed after the arrests. She said Hope never poured any gas on Shanda. That was the end of the interview. The two detectives then went to speak to Melinda and get her statement. Melinda's statement started like this. I told Amanda to stay away from Shanda. I told her I just didn't think it was right, Just tell the little girl we're together. We've been together 2 years and just leave it as that. And I'm getting worried. I would be at Amanda's house and she would call all the time and she would just hang up when I was answered, stuff like that. So I was upset. I did threaten her a few times, but I only planned to threaten her and maybe beat her up. She admitted it was her idea to get the old kitchen knife to scare Shanda. She went over to Louisville to the concert, and when she came back out with Lori, she says Hope and Tony were in the car having sex with two boys. When that ended, they left and went to get Shanda. She said once they got her, she kept telling Shanda in the car, I just want to talk to you. I'm not going to hurt you. But Shanda was really upset and crying. And when they got to Witch's Castle, Hope had the knife and was making all of the threats. Then Lori used string-like rope to strangle Shanda. She claimed Shanda begged her to help her and get Lori off of her. So now, yet again, this is another one of them claiming that Shanda specifically asked them for help. And I just find it beyond reprehensible that if all of these girls were asked at different times, which of course we know none of them are telling the truth, maybe Tony, but the other ones, no, none of them helped. Nobody helped because everybody was scared of everybody else, right? So not one of them who were asked for help helped this little girl? Goodness. Okay, back to what she said. She said Lori grabbed her hand and made her start to stab Shanda. So she's saying Lori was the one doing the stabbing, and then she grabbed her hand, Melinda's hand, and put it over hers and started making her stab her. She said they got home, they heard Shanda scream in the car. Lori went back out and came back with blood on her. She said she never saw Lori hit her with the tire iron. But at one point when they were driving around, Lori got back in and the tire iron was bloody, and she told Melinda to smell it. Now, Crystal also says that Lori told her to smell it. She claimed it was Hope's idea to go to Lemon Road. She confirmed she did get back out and throw the rest of the gas on Shanda. She said they did go to McDonald's and Lori made the sausage joke. When asked what happened to the back of Shanda's head, Melinda said she was hit with the tire tool. As for the damage to Shanda's anus, Melinda assumed maybe Lori did that when she walked back there to the trunk, but she never saw her do that. She did confirm that Hope sprayed the Windex on Shanda's wounds. One curious thing that the detectives did have question about. Shanda had limestone powder on the bottom of her feet, and it was a component on the road next to the field where she was burned. But none of the girls said that she was barefoot at any time except for in the woods, but there was no limestone found there at all. Hope's trial date was set for March 1st, 1993. During their time awaiting their trials, both Melinda and Lori were carrying on new sexual relationships with other criminals. Lori was seeing a girl in prison named April, who would later say that Lori made overt and implied threats against her, telling her that she was going to use a razor blade on her. Lori also told her they could be together spiritually if both of them were to die. She said she preferred them dying than getting into relationships with other people. Please keep in mind, she'd only been in prison a few months. She barely knows this girl, April, yet she's trying to create a suicide pact with her so that they can't ever see other people. April was afraid of Lori, and she said she believed she was capable of harming her. Lori, when questioned by Dr. Shriver, denied any incidents at all with April. In his report, Dr. Shriver said, Mary, Lori, has always been basically evasive and deceptive. She's intelligent enough to be able to fake her answers to some degree if she chooses. She's very secretive and is known to lie. She is emotionally unstable, has identity problems, is insecure, irresponsible, depressed, and has some neurotic features, and features of mild character disorder. She is not psychotic, nor does she suffer from multiple personality disorder. In the first week of December, Lori did an exclusive interview with WKRC TV. It lasted about 5 minutes. She reiterated her stance against Melinda, said it was all Melinda, not her, and she just didn't think Melinda would go that far. She acted as though she was confused on why Shanda was put through so much hell that night. She said Shanda hugged her and asked her not to let Melinda do it. She said she was crying, but there was nothing I could do. At the end of the report, it was stated that Lori felt she was going to beat her charges. She had enrolled in a high school program to get her GED, and she wanted to get a degree in child psychology. During the same week, Jackie, Shanda's mother, did an interview with the Courier Journal, and Jackie had a message for other parents. We don't want you to believe this could happen to our children. I'm here to tell you, as a mother who has had her child murdered, brutally murdered by girls, it did happen, and it could happen again to your child. Jackie talked about how she spoke to her daughter about Amanda and asked if she had ever been touched in any inappropriate way, and that her daughter denied it. She said she pushed it. She tried to ensure Shanda that they loved her and they would never judge her for doing this. They wanted to take her to therapy, but she insisted that she was fine. She also felt that her daughter was forced to go in the car with the girls because she left behind her purse and coat in the house and it was freezing outside, and she never went anywhere without her purse. On December 8th, Amanda was ordered to testify in the hearing against Melinda. She intended to invoke the Fifth Amendment, but she was granted use immunity, meaning none of the information that she provided could be used against her. Now, personally, I feel like this was a mistake, although I do understand why they'd want to use Amanda. But in my opinion, Amanda was at the center of this entire situation. She was mentally abusing Shanda and almost encouraging Melinda to be as jealous as she was. She knew what Melinda threatened to do over and over again. but she did nothing about it. It was almost as if she loved all of the fighting back and forth between the girls. And I truly feel she knew what was going to happen. At some point, she knew what was going to happen. On December 10th, Tony accepted her plea of guilty. She pled guilty to criminal confinement in exchange for her testimony against Melinda and Lori. She also agreed to testify against Hope, who was still maintaining her innocence. On December 14th, prosecutor Guy Townsend made his opening statements. Melinda was now facing 60 years with a minimum of 30. With good time and a minimum sentence, 15 years. Guy began to speak about Shanda, how she met Amanda, the concerns of Shanda's parents, and how they even tried to move her out of the school to protect her. That night, the media ran with Shanda being a possible sacrifice due to the interest in the occult and this circle of stones that was up at Witch's Castle. The media would take anything that was sensational and make it into the biggest rumor. They ran with absolutely anything that they could, no matter how it affected Shanda's family or anybody else. If they heard about the occult, Shanda was now a sacrifice. If they heard about the girls being in a relationship, it was now a lesbian triangle. Very irresponsible, sensationalistic reporting from these vultures, and especially with such a sensitive case. It's day 2. Tony takes the stand. While recounting that night, she said it was mostly Lori who came up with the ideas. Lori also took the stand that day, and she never looked at Melinda. Her account mostly matched Tony's. When describing seeing Shanda in the car in her driveway, she did break down into sobs, but she was facing cross-examination the next morning. She was asked if she ever told Carrie Pope that she would kill her grandmother for her, and she said, "Oh yeah, but that was just a joke." She was asked if she ever told Carrie and the Leatherberry brothers that she would like to kill somebody. She said no, none of that was ever true. Dr. Nichols, the chief medical examiner, took the stand, and he went over Shanda's injuries. When it came to the part about the damage to Shanda's anus, the doctor said, "It was a deep injury with a larger diameter." He was asked, "Could you determine what caused this injury?" And he replied, "A cylindrical, firm object with some type of edge capable of passing through human skin, at least somewhat sharp, cylindrical structure." He was asked, "Could it have been a tire tool?" And the doctor replied, "Yes." He went on to say that there were multiple insertions into her anus, that an object had been inserted at least 3.5 inches. He was asked, "Was this during life or death?" And the doctor replied, "During life." He said he knew this because there's a vital reaction with bleeding into the injured tissues. Her cause of death was smoke inhalation and burning. Photos of her autopsy were shown. Amanda took the stand. She was asked to describe her relationship with Melinda. And she said it was a girlfriend relationship. She was asked if it was sexual. She said it was. She described January 10th and the phone call from Melinda. She said they didn't really discuss anything, that on January 11th, she was shown the blood in the trunk. She said nothing very new or different than what the official police statement said. But I am now wondering as well. Amanda's given this deal. She's They confessed to her. She knew exactly what happened. She saw the blood in the trunk, and she did not go to the police either. Both Carrie and Crystal testified as well. Another girl, Christy, came along and testified. She admitted that she wrote an unsigned letter about a former plan to harm Amanda. The letter was written on 1/14 of 92, and it said, "The thing about Melinda and Amanda is true in a way. See, they broke up over Shanda a while back. When Amanda was fine without Melinda, she got jealous that Amanda was with Shanda. Shanda liked Amanda, and I know that for a fact. Back during Harvest Homecoming, Amanda and Shanda went to the haunted house, and Melinda spent the night with me. When Amanda got home, we asked where she went, and she said, oh, just out. So we called Shanda to ask her to see if she really went out with Amanda, and she said yes. So we scared her. Please don't tell anybody, but we were going to do the same thing that happened to Shanda to Amanda back in October. We didn't, though, because Amanda had fallen asleep, and when we got to her house, she was sleeping, and some big guy came around the corner and chased us down. I hopped in the car, and we got out of there fast. Right back." Under cross-examination, Christy said she wrote the letters a couple of months after Shanda's death, and a few days after Shanda's death, she was admitted into a drug and alcohol treatment center. Now, these were people who were coming in to either provide character witness for these girls or not. And most of the time, even when they were trying to provide some type of character to say that these girls were decent, it ended up failing because the things that these girls were up to were just horrible all the time. I mean, before Melinda came up with the idea to kill Shanda, she was going to do the exact same thing to Amanda, but they got chased out of there. Now, Amanda was the one she loved, the one she killed for, and she had the same exact plan that she told other people about. They even drove to her house to try to get her. Shanda's dad took the stand on Thursday, December 17th. He was asked to make a statement about how his daughter's death had affected him, and he said, "As far as myself, I feel a great deep hole in my chest. My heart sags sorrowfully. This is my only child. I'm going to miss the simple things like watching her graduate, go to college, maybe having kids of her own one day. She was Daddy's little girl, and I loved her to death." Her half-sister Paige testified and made a statement as well. She said, "My sister wasn't a mean person. She loved everyone. She wanted to be friends with everybody. She would never hurt anybody, and she didn't deserve to die." Before they rested, Melinda's cellmate was called to testify. She said Melinda did discuss the murder and would literally burst out laughing over it. The prosecution rested and the defense began. The teens who came in to testify on behalf of Melinda were a mess. They were outrageous, kissing in the hallways, getting in front of cameras, behaving inappropriately based on the seriousness of this case. Larry Leatherberry walked into the court in all black, all torn clothing, safety pins all over them, a torn glove, spiked jewelry around his neck and wrists, and he did confirm that Lori was fascinated with death and blood. Keep in mind, they are there to testify on behalf of Melinda, so they need to make sure that Lori doesn't look good in all of this. Melinda's childhood was brought up for the court to hear. We covered part of this story in part 1. Do you remember Teddy, the cousin that we talked about in part 1, the babysitter? She's now 28 as of this story happening. She took the stand and told the court that when she was 10, she babysat for the Loveless family while the parents worked. She was there on and off for about 6 years. She said Larry Loveless molested her the entire time she was there. It started as touching, and it went on to oral, anal, and vaginal sex. One of her duties at the house was to wake up Larry in the morning. He would wake up, pull her into bed, and have sex with her. She assumed it was something she was supposed to do because Larry was doing all of this to his daughters as well. She described a time when Larry brought all 4 girls into the garage. He stripped them naked and chained them together and went down the line having sex with each one of them. Melinda was 3 or 4 years old at the time. He would take them into the bathroom and make them perform sexual acts. Teddy said she witnessed many incidents. Edie, Teddy's older sister, also testified about an incident with Larry and herself. Before the 2 youngest were born, Edie was spending the night, and she was awakened by what she thought was a nightmare. Larry had his hand over her mouth and was having anal sex with her. Margie was in the bed with them asleep. She further described incidents between age 8 and 9 where Larry would touch her sexually, take her panties out of her overnight bag and sniff them, something that he did very often with his wife and daughters. On Friday, Michelle, Melinda's oldest sister, testified. She talked about their childhood. She said her dad was mentally and physically abusive to everyone except for Melinda. He would lock Michelle in the closets overnight, and she was terrified of the dark. She would urinate in the closet and be forced to use her own clothing to clean it up. He also had taught her how to clean and use a gun when she was around 5 years old. While learning, he pointed a gun at her head and shot it. It missed her and hit the wall. He said he was trying to teach her, this is why you never clean a loaded gun. She said the relationship between her sister Melinda and Larry was more like husband and wife. Melinda slept with him until the night before Larry left the family for good. She spoke of how he mentally abused them. They would come home to missing pets. He would constantly threaten suicide and get everybody worked up, only to come home walking back in like nothing ever happened. He would wear their clothing and underwear. He would grab her underwear and say they stunk. He would masturbate and then put the underwear under their beds or on the windowsills outside of the home. Melissa, the middle child, also testified. She was a nervous child and now a shy, quiet adult. She said she never knew when her dad would come into the room what he might do. He would get into the shower with her and she would cry and beg him to get out, but he would just laugh at her. Her self-esteem suffered greatly because Larry berated her every chance he got. She too was raped by Larry. The therapist who had seen Melinda at LifeSpring testified and was asked if she made any reports of this abuse once she found this stuff out from Melinda. And she said she did. She reported it to Floyd County Department of Public Welfare and never heard a word back from them. Day 6 of the trial brought 2 psychologists, Dr. Baker and Dr. Lawler, who both had evaluated Melinda. They diagnosed her with borderline personality disorder and PTSD. They said for someone with borderline personality disorder to feel as though they were being abandoned in some way, it would be like falling apart. They said she functioned on the level of a 3 or 4 year old that had an infantile dependency. She had depression, impulse control, fluctuating attachments to others, fluctuating self expression, and these were all symptoms of borderline personality disorder. She was not a leader, she had limited intellect, and it would have been far too difficult for her to organize or direct complicated activities. During Dr. Baker's testimony, he was asked what his opinion was of the previous report from Dr. Shipley that Lori was a sociopath. He said she was strong willed, oppositional, and easily prone to violence. He estimated that Lori was a much greater risk for violence than Melinda. Now, he did say both had significant emotional problems, but Melinda's were far greater internally. She was suffering from what was going on inside of her in terms of her ability to think and deal with emotions, while Lori had more to do with her involvement in the world. She's impulsive, and when she acts out, she has a great capacity for violence. The defense rested, and Shanda's mother spoke. She started off by showing a beautiful video with photos of her daughter. She talked about how her daughter's death shattered their worlds. Here's what she said. I no longer have anyone to cook for, no one to wash clothes for, no one to kiss goodnight. After my daughter's death, I avoided everyone. I couldn't stand to see their pain or hear them speak of my daughter. I've been unable to work and was admitted to the hospital because I was suicidal. I was prescribed medication for depression and sleep. I can't control my emotions most of the time, and I cry because I want my baby back. I want her home for Christmas, but I can't have her. I didn't get to buy Shanda any presents. There are no presents for her under my tree. She blamed Melinda, who she says has cheated her out of being with her daughter during this lifetime. She finished by looking directly at Melinda and saying, "It is my wish for you that you live your life with the memories of her screams and the sight of her burned and mutilated body. I'm not sure who you love most in life, Melinda, whether it's your mother or your father, but I want you to imagine that person being Shanda that night. I want you to imagine them in the trunk of that car. I want you to imagine the person you love the most begging and screaming for their life. I want you to imagine that person laying on the ground, burned and mutilated. Maybe then, and I doubt this seriously, you'll feel a small portion of the pain that our family feels. May you rot in hell." She turned to the judge and asked them to please give her the max 60 years. Anything else would be a crime equal to the murder of her daughter. Melinda, too, wanted to make a statement to the family. She said, "I know there is nothing. I know I can't take away the pain, and I can't bring her back, but I am sorry. I truly am sorry, and I do feel your pain, and if I could trade places with your daughter, I would. I am so sorry." December 28th was Lori's hearing, and the judge's ruling on Melinda would be read after Lori's hearing. Melinda testified against Lori for 2 days, implicating Lori in everything and basically removing herself from everything. Entered into evidence were pages of reports on Melinda from the Clark County Jail. which showed Melinda expected special treatment and would write grievances to the jailers. She was often in violation of jail rules and was put into lockdown for threatening another jailmate. Crystal was called to the stand, and she denied that Melinda ever said she wanted to kill Shanda. Amanda testified and discussed her relationship with Shanda. She denied thinking breaking up with Melinda and having a relationship with Shanda could put Shanda at any risk at all. She didn't think it was risky. She thought it was fine, even though Melinda had made all of these threats. Carrie Pope testified, and she was honest about Lori's death and fire fascination, and she also got a little bit into her occult practices. Melinda's former cellmate, Arlinda, was called, and she testified she saw no remorse in Melinda. Melinda almost seemed to celebrate her crime, and once she signed an autograph for one of the girls. She had her high school yearbook up there, and she circled Shanda's photo. And under it she wrote, "So young, so pretty, had to die early." She had a photo of Shanda on her wall in her cell, and another of herself, and under hers was written, "Most Wanted." Lori testified on her own behalf. She talked about her awful childhood and how she too was molested. She said being born was the worst thing that ever happened to her. When asked how she felt about the murder, she said, "I don't feel human. I don't know. I just can't believe it happened. I know how terrible it would be to lose someone. I'll live with that night for the rest of my life. I know I will. It's never going to leave. I think about it every day. I can't help it." One of the witnesses was Dr. Engum, who said Lori had no sense of self. She would literally intertwine her personality with others like a chameleon. She was a follower, and in his opinion, was not the ringleader. She suffers from paranoia, schizophrenia, not psychosis. Her anger is directed inward, and she is a walking time bomb. He felt she was in denial about the crime because it was just too big to swallow. He said she had no empathy for herself, so it was very hard for her to have empathy for others. She views the world as a terrible, hostile place, and she does not know how to trust. When she does trust, she isn't very sure that they'll remain, so she's always fearing they will abandon her, and her response to that is anger and aggression. January 4th, 1993. Judge Todd sentenced Melinda and Lori. There were spectators everywhere, all over the courtrooms, out in the hallways. They were in other rooms and were listening via the speaker system. Melinda first. 60 years. Marjorie collapsed into Michelle, sobbing, while everybody else clapped and cheered. Lori, 60 years. Her family wept, and again, the crowd cheered. January 6th, a local TV station reported that Lori negotiated to sell her story to TV and movie producers. Shanda's parents immediately filed a lawsuit for $1 billion to prevent the girls from ever capitalizing on this crime. January 26th, Tony's sentencing begins. Her dad and many character witnesses testified on her behalf, basically framing her as a quiet, well-liked girl. Tony took the stand and read a letter to Shanda's parents. "I am so sorry about your little girl. I know you can never forgive me for being with those girls on January 10th and 11th, but I would like to explain some things to you. I tried to help her. After I gave her a hug and said I was sorry, I asked Melinda to please take her home. but Melinda told me to shut up, so I did. I was terrified of Melinda and Lori. Melinda had a knife and was going to kill Shanda. I know I should be punished, but in my heart, seeing her tortured and burned was punishment in itself. I didn't get help because I was scared they'd kill me too. That night and morning will live visibly in my mind for the rest of my life. I know you have the right to hate me. I just wish there was something that I could do for you. But all I can do is say how very sorry I am. Jackie refused Tony's apology. She replied with the following: Tony is haunted by the nightmares of Shanda's burning body, which she claims she never saw. She claims she has nightmares of the burned body coming to ask her to help her. I'm sure that must be horrible for her. I pray those nightmares continue to haunt you for the rest of your life, and may your life be very long. I have seen no evidence of remorse whatsoever. What I have seen is a spoiled, rotten child who is totally put out by having to be here. A child who takes no responsibility for her actions and expects everyone around her to shoulder the blame. I've sat through 3 sentencing hearings and had to look at my daughter's murderers day after day while they lie and put on acts that are worthy of Oscars. I have listened while each and every one cried rape and child abuse. I see attorneys trying to convince everyone else that these girls are victims. The victim here is Shanda Renee Sharer and her family and friends. I asked the judge for the maximum sentence, 20 years. On January 28th, the judge sentences Tony to 10 years for criminal confinement and 10 years for aggravating circumstances. Counting time served, she would be eligible for parole in 9 years. April 19th, Hope was facing 30 to 60 years. Her hearing was not in the same town. It was 5 hours away in South Bend. Shanda's parents were there along with Hope's. Carl Rippey, Hope's dad, took the stand. He described her as an obedient child, helpful at home, enjoyed caring for her nephew. He said she was a very happy girl, but she no longer laughed, and she had constant nightmares. Dr. Sheehan testified that Hope was peer pressured into the situation. She was a child who didn't understand that she had participated in a murder. She was numb because she had panicked. She had the inability to reason or think. It was not even in her awareness that she had a choice. Steve Sharer took the stand. Addressing Hope, he said, "You have no idea the problems you've caused in our family. It's very hard to understand why you didn't try and stop this from happening. May you rot in hell with the rest of your murdering friends." The judge sentenced Hope to 60 years, with 10 of those as probation. The judge said, Hope had choices. She poured the gasoline so no one would get caught, even though she knew it would kill Shanda. Her lack of mercy, of tender courage, is a horrifying lesson for all of us. Melinda, Lori, Hope, and Tony were all sent to the Indiana Women's Prison. Tony remained away from the other 3 as much as possible. Melinda and Lori are keeping Hope safe like they would a little sister. Melinda began to train dogs in prison, and I'm going to read you a bit of an article. Melinda Lovelace has a new lease on life as a trainer of service dogs for the disabled. In 7 years, Lovelace has become one of the most trusted and competent trainers in the Indiana Canine Assistant Network, ICANN program. The founder of the program is a burn victim, like Shanda, and he went to Shanda's mother, Jackie, in 2012 and asked her to watch a video. She did. It was of Melinda training dogs in prison. Jackie said she saw someone who was almost reborn. She felt ICANN taught Melinda something she lacked: compassion. So Jackie did something amazing. She took Charlie, the owner of the program, up on his idea to donate a puppy in Shanda's name. She let Melinda train it. The puppy's name was Angel. Toni was released in 2000 after serving 9 years. She's now married, has 2 children, and lives in Indianapolis. Hope was released in 2006 after serving 14 years of a 50-year sentence. She stayed on supervised parole for 5 years. Hope lives in Indianapolis and is married to a woman named Alicia. Lori Tackett was released on the 26th anniversary of Shanda's death in 2018. She stayed out of the public eye, but while in prison, she was known to be participating in religious groups. Melinda was released in 2019 and changed her name to Lindy Doris Monroe. She moved to Kentucky. Steve Sharer never recovered from his daughter's death. He basically did everything he could to kill himself, besides putting a gun to his head. He drank himself to death and died in 2005 and is buried near his daughter. Shanda's mom, Jackie, went on to work in the office of then Floyd County Prosecutor Stan Faith and is employed these days there as a paralegal. Faith said Jackie fights her way through the dark moments and then leads many others through theirs.
Welcome to Chasing the Lost.